Welcome back to HOA Control Freaks. One upgrade turned into an HOA power trip. I am pressing submit right now, and Nancy is screaming that I did not submit the right form and that means the work is illegal. Her face is red, her finger is jabbing toward my phone, and she has planted her little collapsible step stool right on the property line, like she owns the dirt itself. I work as a fleet mechanic for a municipal garage, and I do not have time for this. But here we are. Nancy Wright is the Community Standards Chair for Juniper Terrace Community Association, and she has decided my fence project is her personal war. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a neighborhood where the board claims authority over anything near easements, and Nancy enforces that claim like it is a blood oath. I rent this house, and my landlord made it clear that any HOA drama could end my lease early. So the stakes here are not abstract. She is still talking. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there. That is her boomerang line, and she has said it twice already today. She waves a laminated fence guideline sheet in a plastic sleeve, but she will not let me read it. Every time I reach for it, she pulls it back and quotes a section number that does not match anything in the actual covenants I downloaded last week. The fence is 4 feet tall, pressure-treated pine, and I have the receipt from the contractor sitting in my truck. I submitted the architectural request form 3 weeks ago, got approval in writing from the management company, and started work yesterday. Nancy showed up this morning with a clipboard, a tape measure, and a threat to issue a stop work order if I did not pull the posts back 6 inches. 6 inches. She measured from the curb to the fence line and decided I am encroaching on a drainage easement that does not appear on any plat map I can find. I asked her to show me the survey. She said the HOA does not provide surveys to residents. I asked her to show me the rule that says I need a 6-inch setback. She said it is in the guidelines, and she tapped the laminated sheet again. I let her say my name loud, because later I wanted it on the recording. That is my trump card tease, and I am holding it close for now. Nancy does not know I have been documenting every word since the first phone call 2 weeks ago, and she definitely does not know what else I have in my back pocket. She snaps her tape measure open and kneels next to the fence post, measuring again. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. That is her catchphrase, and it makes my teeth hurt every time. She writes something on her clipboard, does not show me, and stands up. Thunder rolls in the distance, and the wind picks up. Nancy does not flinch. My phone buzzes. It is my friend Eric, a CPA who has been helping me dig through the HOA financials. He spotted red flags in the ledger last week, and now he is asking if I got the vendor contract copies yet. I text back that I am a little busy, and Nancy leans over my shoulder to see the screen. I pull the phone away. She smiles. "You are going to want to cooperate," she says, "because if you do not, I will file a formal violation with the board tonight, and tomorrow you will have a hearing notice." The fines start at $50 a day, and they double every week you stay out of compliance. I have seen people rack up thousands before they figured out how serious we are. I ask her what compliance means. She says pull the fence back 6 inches and resubmit with the correct form. I ask her which form. She says the easement encroachment waiver, which is a new one on me. I checked the HOA website yesterday and there is no mention of an easement waiver anywhere. I tell her that. She laughs and says the website is not the official record. A neighbor walks by, slowing down to watch. It is Bill, a board member who is pretending to check his mailbox but is clearly eavesdropping. Nancy notices and waves at him. He waves back and keeps walking. I make a mental note that Bill saw this whole thing, because later I am going to need witnesses. Nancy plants her step stool again and climbs up to look over the fence line. She is checking the height, even though I already told her it is 4 feet and the covenants allow up to 6. She does not care. She pulls out her phone and takes pictures of the posts, the concrete, and my truck in the driveway. I ask her what the pictures are for. She says documentation for the enforcement file. I ask her if she has a copy of the architectural approval I already received. She says the approval was conditional and I did not meet the conditions. I ask her what conditions. She says review of the site plan, which I never submitted. I ask her why the management company did not mention a site plan when they approved my request. She says the management company does not have authority to waive HOA requirements. This is where it gets interesting, because Nancy just contradicted the written approval I have in my truck. I excuse myself, walk to the truck, and pull out the folder. Inside is the email approval from the management company, signed by the local rep, explicitly stating that my fence meets all HOA guidelines and no further action is required. I walk back and show it to Nancy on my phone. She squints at the screen, scrolls up, scrolls down, and then hands the phone back. "That is not binding," she says. "The board has final authority, and I am telling you right now that this fence is not in compliance. You can either fix it voluntarily, or I will issue the violation and you will fix it under protest while the fines pile up." I ask her if I can attend the board meeting to dispute the violation. She says I can request to be added to the agenda, but the next meeting is not for 3 weeks, and enforcement starts immediately. I ask her if I can see the drainage easement map. She says it is on file with the county, and I am welcome to look it up myself. I ask her why she is enforcing a setback that is not in the covenants. She says it is in the guidelines, and she waves the laminated sheet again. I reach for it. She pulls it back. I ask her if I can at least photograph it. She says no, it is internal board material. I ask her how I am supposed to comply with a rule I am not allowed to see. She says ignorance is not an excuse, and if I had attended the annual meeting last year, I would have heard the guidelines presentation. I did not live here last year. Nancy shrugs. Thunder cracks closer now, and the first raindrops start to fall. Nancy folds her step stool and heads toward her car, which is parked across the street. She calls back over her shoulder that I have until 5 p.m. to submit the waiver form, or the violation goes into the system. I ask her where I get the waiver form. She says, "Check the office," and then she is gone. I stand in the rain and look at the fence posts. 4 of them are set, 2 more to go, and the contractor is supposed to come back tomorrow to hang the panels. If Nancy issues a stop work order, the contractor will leave, and I will be stuck with a half-finished fence and a landlord who is already asking questions. I call Eric. He picks up on the first ring and asks how it went. I tell him Nancy is threatening a $50 a day fine starting tomorrow, and she is inventing forms that do not exist. He asks if I got her on recording. I tell him yes, everything since she showed up this morning. He asks if she mentioned the vendor contracts. I tell him no, but she did say the management company does not have authority. Eric goes quiet for a second, and then he says that is interesting. Because the management contract he pulled from the county clerk explicitly gives the management company authority to approve architectural requests unless the board votes to override. I ask him if that vote would be in the meeting minutes. He says it would have to be, and he already checked the last 6 months of minutes. No vote. That means Nancy is enforcing a rule the board never voted on, using a form that does not exist, based on an easement map she will not show me. I ask Eric what I should do. He says get a survey, get it fast, and make sure it shows the property line and the easement boundaries. Then take it to the management company regional supervisor and force them to issue a written correction. I ask him who the regional supervisor is. He says he will text me the contact info, and I should not go through the local rep because the local rep already caved to Nancy once. I thank him and hang up. The rain is coming down harder now. I grab my tools and throw them in the truck, then cover the fence posts with a tarp so the concrete does not wash out. My phone buzzes again. It is a neighbor from 3 houses down, someone I have never met, asking in the group chat if I am the one putting up the illegal fence. The message includes a cropped screenshot of something Nancy posted, and the crop makes it look like the management company denied my request. This is the side complication Eric warned me about. Nancy is good at controlling the narrative, and now half the neighborhood thinks I am some kind of rogue builder. I type a reply explaining that I have written approval, but before I hit send, I realize it will not matter. The group chat has already made up its mind, and anything I say will look defensive. I delete the draft and put my phone away. Let them think what they want. I have bigger problems. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares that end in justice. The next morning, I call the surveyor Eric recommended. He says he can get out here by Thursday, which is 3 days away, and the report will take another 2 days after that. I ask him if he can rush it. He says he can try, but county records requests take time, and he wants to make sure the easement data is accurate. I tell him I have a neighbor who offered to testify but can only make it tonight before travel plans, and I need the survey done before the HOA tries to railroad me into a hearing. The surveyor sighs and says he will move some things around. He asks for the address and the plat number, and I give him both. While I am on the phone, a car pulls up. It is not Nancy this time, it is a tow truck, and the driver is talking to someone on his radio. I hang up and walk over. The driver rolls down his window and asks if I am the resident. I say yes. He hands me a clipboard with a tow authorization slip and says the HOA called in a vehicle parked in violation of the fire lane. I look at my truck. It is in my own driveway, 10 feet from the curb. I tell the driver that. He shrugs and says he is just following the work order. I ask him who signed the authorization. He points to a signature on the slip, and I recognize Nancy's handwriting. I ask him if he is seriously going to tow a vehicle out of a private driveway based on an HOA call. He says if the HOA has towing authority in the covenants, then yes. I pull out my phone and call Eric again. He does not pick up, so I leave a message explaining the tow situation and asking if that is even legal. Then I call the management company. The local rep answers, and I explain what is happening. She puts me on hold for 2 minutes, then comes back and says the HOA does not have towing authority except for vehicles blocking access or parked in red zones. I tell her my truck is in my driveway. She says she will call Nancy and sort it out. I ask her to do it now because the tow driver is hooking up the winch. She says she will call me back in 5 minutes. I tell the tow driver to wait. He says he has other calls, and if I do not have proof the authorization is invalid, he is taking the truck. I show him the email approval for the fence, which has nothing to do with parking, and I explain that Nancy is retaliating because I would not pull the fence back. He looks at the email, looks at me, and says he is not a lawyer. Then his phone rings. He answers, listens for a few seconds, and hangs up. He unhooks the winch and says the job is canceled. The tow truck leaves, and I stand in the driveway shaking. Nancy just tried to tow my truck out of my own driveway because I would not comply with a fake rule. That is escalation step 1, and I know it is not going to stop here. My phone rings. It is the management company rep. She says she spoke to Nancy, and Nancy insists the truck was parked in the fire lane. I tell her the fire lane is on the street, not in my driveway. She says she understands, and she is going to document the incident. I ask her if that means Nancy will face consequences. She says she will forward my concern to the board president. I ask her who the board president is. She says Nancy Wright. I laugh, and it is not a friendly sound. The rep goes quiet, and then she says she will escalate to the regional supervisor if I want. I tell her yes, please escalate, and I want everything in writing. She says she will send an email summary by end of day. I hang up and walk back to the fence. The tarp is still in place, and the posts look solid. I pull out my tape measure and check the distance from the curb to the fence line. 18 inches, same as yesterday. I take a picture, save it, and text it to Eric with a note explaining the tow attempt. He texts back immediately. That is harassment. Document everything, and do not let them provoke you into doing something stupid. I am pulling the vendor contracts today, and I think I found something. I ask him what he found. He says the HOA has been paying the same landscaping vendor for 3 years, and the contract renewal votes are not in the minutes. He also says the vendor is owned by Nancy's brother-in-law, which is not disclosed anywhere in the financials. I ask him if that is illegal. He says it depends on the state and the covenants, but at a minimum it is a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed and voted on. That is my evidence type. A third-party CPA spotting the red flags in the HOA ledger, and now we have proof of vendor favoritism and hidden contracts. I ask Eric if he can write up a summary. He says he already started, and he will have it ready by tomorrow. The rest of the day is quiet, which makes me nervous. Nancy has not called, has not sent another email, and has not shown up with her step stool. I check the group chat, and someone posted a photo of my fence with a caption asking if anyone knows the rules. 3 people replied saying they thought the setback was 12 inches, not 18. One person said they thought easements were only enforced for utilities, not cosmetic projects. Nobody has the actual rule, because the actual rule does not exist. Nancy made it up, and now the neighborhood is trying to reverse engineer what she meant. Thursday morning, the surveyor arrives at 7 a.m. He is an older guy with a truck full of equipment, and he spends 3 hours walking the property line with a GPS unit and a tape measure. He drives stakes at the corners, checks the county easement maps on his tablet, and takes photos of everything. I ask him if the fence is on the property line. He says, "Give me another hour and I will have the preliminary data." I leave him alone and go inside to make coffee. When I come back out, he is packing up his gear. He hands me a printout with a rough sketch and some measurements. He taps the sketch and says the property line is exactly where I thought it was, and the drainage easement runs along the back boundary, not the side where I put the fence. I ask him if that means Nancy was wrong. He says based on the county records, yes, there is no easement encumbrance on the side yard. He also says the setback requirement in the covenants is 0 inches from the property line unless the fence is over 6 feet, which mine is not. He will have the full written report by Saturday, and I can use it however I want. I thank him and pay him on the spot. He leaves, and I sit on the porch with the printout in my hand. This is it. This is the proof that Nancy has been enforcing a fake rule, and she has no authority to stop my fence. I take a photo of the sketch and text it to Eric. He replies with a thumbs up and says he is finishing the vendor contract summary today. Friday morning, I get an email from the management company. It is not from the local rep, it is from the regional supervisor, and the subject line is RE, Juniper Terrace Compliance Dispute. I open it, and my stomach drops. The email says the board has reviewed my case and determined that the architectural approval was issued in error. The fence must be removed or relocated to meet the revised setback requirements, and I have 7 days to comply or face a hearing. Fines will begin accruing on day 8 at $50 per day. The email is signed by the regional supervisor, copied to Nancy and the local rep. I read it twice, and then I call Eric. He picks up and says he just saw the email, they forwarded him a copy. I ask him how this is possible. He says the board is claiming the approval was conditional, and they are trying to bury the fact that Nancy never had authority to issue the conditions in the first place. I ask him what I do now. He says we go to the hearing, we present the survey, we present the vendor favoritism evidence, and we force the board to either back down or explain why they are letting Nancy rewrite the rules in real time. He also says we need to get the timeline on record, because the board just contradicted their own management company in writing. The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday, which is also the night my neighbor who offered to testify is leaving for a work trip. I text him and ask if he can still make it. He says he will try, but his flight is at 8 p.m., so if the hearing runs late, he will have to leave early. I tell him that is fine, just show up and tell them what you saw. That night, I go through the covenants again, page by page, looking for anything that supports Nancy's setback claim. There is nothing. The only mention of setbacks is for structures over 6 feet, and the only mention of easements is for utility access, not cosmetic restrictions. I print the relevant pages and highlight the sections. Saturday morning, the surveyor emails me the full report. It is a 12-page PDF with photos, measurements, plat maps, and a written summary. The summary says the fence is located entirely on my property, does not encroach on any recorded easement, and complies with all county and covenant setback requirements. The surveyor also notes that the drainage easement Nancy referenced runs along the rear boundary, not the side yard, and is marked clearly on the county plat. I forward the report to Eric, the management company, and the regional supervisor. Then I sit back and wait. Monday morning, Nancy calls. Her voice is tight and angry. She says I am making this harder than it needs to be, and if I just move the fence back 6 inches, we can all move on. I ask her why I should move a fence that is legally compliant. She says the board has the authority to interpret the covenants, and they have interpreted them to require a setback. I ask her when the board voted on that interpretation. She says it is an ongoing interpretation and it does not require a vote. I ask her if that means she decided it herself. She says she is the community standards chair, and it is her job to enforce the standards. I ask her if inventing new rules counts as enforcement. She hangs up. I sit there holding the phone, and I realize Nancy is panicking. She knows the survey proves she was wrong, and now she is scrambling to reframe the dispute as a board interpretation issue. so she can claim she was acting on behalf of the HOA instead of making things up. Tuesday, I get another email from the regional supervisor. This one is different. It says the board has received my survey report and is reviewing the matter. The hearing is still scheduled for Thursday, but the supervisor wants to meet with me privately on Wednesday to discuss a resolution. The email includes a phone number and a request to call before noon. I call Eric first. He says this is good, it means they are worried. I ask him if I should take the meeting. He says yes, but record it if you can, and do not agree to anything without getting it in writing. He also says bring the vendor favoritism summary, because if they try to pressure you, you can remind them that you have more evidence than just the fence. Wednesday at 10 a.m., I meet the regional supervisor at a coffee shop near the HOA office. Her name is Linda, and she is older than Nancy, with gray hair and a no-nonsense vibe. She orders a black coffee and gets straight to the point. She says the survey is clear and the fence is compliant. However, the board feels there has been a breakdown in communication, and they want to avoid a prolonged dispute. I ask her what that means. She says they are willing to waive the fines and approve the fence as is if I agree not to pursue any further complaints against the board or Nancy. I ask her why I would agree to that. She says because the alternative is a hearing, and even if I win, the process will take months and cost me more in legal fees than the fence is worth. I pull out the vendor favoritism summary Eric prepared and slide it across the table. Linda picks it up, scans the first page, and her face goes still. I tell her that Nancy has been enforcing selective rules to protect vendor contracts that benefit her family, and the board has been covering for her by manipulating the meeting minutes. I also tell her that I have recordings of Nancy admitting she has the authority to issue enforcement letters, which contradicts what the management company told me. Linda sets the summary down and looks at me. She says if what I am saying is true, it is a serious compliance issue, and the management company will have to investigate. I tell her it is true, and I have the proof. She asks if I am planning to take this to the state HOA oversight board. I tell her I have not decided yet, but I am not signing any waiver that lets Nancy keep doing this to the next person. Linda nods slowly. She says she will take this back to her office and get back to me by tomorrow. I ask her if the hearing is still on for Thursday. She says it is, but she is going to recommend the board cancel it and issue a formal retraction. I ask her if Nancy will face consequences. Linda does not answer that, but her expression tells me she is not happy with Nancy right now. I leave the coffee shop and call Eric. He says I did exactly the right thing, and now we wait to see if the board folds or doubles down. I ask him what happens if they double down. He says then we go to the hearing, we present everything, and we let the other residents see what Nancy has been doing. He also says he will be there Thursday night as my witness. Thursday morning, I get a text from the neighbor who was going to testify. He says he is sorry, but his flight got moved up, and he has to leave at 4 p.m. He will not make the hearing. I text back that it is fine, Eric will be there, and I have enough evidence without him. He wishes me luck and says he hopes I nail Nancy to the wall. At 6 p.m., I walk into the HOA clubhouse for the hearing. The room is set up with a long table at the front where the board sits, and a podium in the middle for residents to speak. Nancy is already there, sitting at the table with her laminated guideline sheet and her step stool folded beside her chair. 3 other board members are present, including Bill, the guy who pretended to check his mailbox. Linda, the regional supervisor, is also there, standing off to the side with a legal pad. She nods at me when I walk in, but does not say anything. Eric arrives a few minutes later and sits in the back row. Nancy calls the meeting to order and reads the agenda. My fence dispute is listed as item 4, after budget updates and landscaping contract renewal. I sit down and wait. The budget update takes 10 minutes. The landscaping contract renewal takes another 15, and I watch carefully as Nancy moves to approve the renewal without discussion. Bill seconds the motion, and it passes 3-1. The dissenting vote comes from a younger woman I have not seen before, and she asks why the vendor contract was not put out for competitive bid. Nancy says it is standard practice to renew existing contracts unless there is a performance issue. The younger woman looks like she wants to argue, but she lets it drop. I make a note that she might be an ally later. Finally, Nancy calls my name and asks me to approach the podium. I stand up, grab my folder, and walk to the front. Nancy starts by summarizing the dispute. She says I installed a fence without proper approval, refused to comply with the setback requirements, and ignored multiple requests to submit the correct forms. I interrupt and say that is not accurate. Nancy looks annoyed, but Linda gestures for me to continue. I pull out the email approval from the management company and hand copies to the board. I explain that I submitted the request 3 weeks ago, received written approval, and started work in full compliance with the covenants. Nancy says the approval was conditional. I ask her to show me where the conditions are stated in writing. She does not answer. I pull out the survey report and hand copies to the board. I explain that a licensed surveyor confirmed the fence is on my property, does not encroach on any easement, and meets all setback requirements in the covenants. Bill asks if the survey is certified. I say yes, and the surveyor is willing to testify if needed. The younger board member asks why Nancy claimed there was an easement issue. Nancy says she was working from memory, and the survey must be more recent than the maps she referenced. I ask her which maps she referenced. She does not answer. I pull out the highlighted covenant pages and point to the setback section. I read it aloud, slowly, and ask the board if anyone can show me where it says 6 inches. Nobody speaks. Linda stands up and addresses the board. She says the management company has reviewed the case, and based on the survey and the written approval, the fence is compliant. She recommends the board rescind the violation notice and waive any fines. Nancy starts to object, but Linda cuts her off and says the regional office is also reviewing the vendor contract process, and there will be a separate audit of the board's approval procedures. Nancy's face goes red. She asks Linda if she is accusing the board of impropriety. Linda says she is not accusing anyone, but the financials show irregularities that need to be addressed. Bill shifts in his chair and looks at the door. I take a breath and pull out the vendor favoritism summary. I hand it to Linda and ask if I can enter it into the record. Linda takes it, scans the first page, and says it will be included in the audit. Nancy demands to see it. Linda hands her a copy. Nancy reads for about 30 seconds, and then she stands up. She says this is a witch hunt, and I am trying to destroy her reputation because I did not get my way. I ask her if the vendor is her brother-in-law. She does not answer. I ask her if the landscaping contract was put out for bid. She says that is not relevant to the fence dispute. The younger board member says it sounds relevant to her, and she wants to see the contract files. Bill says he thinks we should table this and revisit it next month. Nancy says there is nothing to revisit, and she moves to uphold the violation. Bill does not second. The motion dies. Linda speaks again. She says the violation is rescinded effective immediately, and the board will issue a written apology and correction. Nancy objects. Linda says the regional office has the authority to override the local board in compliance disputes, and this decision is final. She also says the board will hold a special meeting in 2 weeks to review the vendor contracts and the enforcement procedures. Nancy stands up, grabs her laminated sheet and her step stool, and walks out. The door slams behind her. The room is silent for a few seconds, and then the younger board member says she thinks it is time for a recall vote. Bill looks uncomfortable, but does not argue. Linda says residents can petition for a recall if they get enough signatures, and the management company will facilitate the process. I thank the board and walk out. Eric follows me, and we stand in the parking lot under the streetlights. He says that went better than he expected, and he thinks Nancy is done. I ask him what happens next. He says we wait for the audit, and we make sure the vendor contracts become public. He also says the younger board member looked ready to run for president, and if she does, I should support her. The next day, I get an email from Linda. It includes a formal written correction stating that my fence is compliant, all fines are waived, and the board apologizes for the error. The email also says the landscaping contract has been suspended pending the audit, and the board will meet in 2 weeks to discuss governance reforms. Nancy does not respond. She does not call, does not email, and does not show up at my house. The group chat goes quiet for a few days, and then someone posts a message asking if anyone else is concerned about the vendor contracts. 3 people reply saying they want to see the financials. One person says they are starting a petition for a recall vote. 2 weeks later, the special meeting happens. The clubhouse is packed, standing room only, and Linda is there with a full audit report. She walks the board and the residents through the vendor contracts, the missing approval votes, and the undisclosed conflict of interest. She also presents the timeline showing that Nancy issued enforcement letters without board approval, manipulated meeting minutes to remove objections, and used selective enforcement to intimidate residents who questioned her authority. Bill resigns on the spot. Another board member I have never met also resigns. Nancy refuses to resign, so the residents vote to recall her. The vote is not close. The younger board member runs for president and wins. She appoints 2 new members, and together they vote to adopt a transparency policy requiring all vendor contracts to be posted online and all enforcement letters to be reviewed by the full board before issuance. They also vote to refund every resident who was fined under Nancy's selective enforcement campaign, and they issue a memo clarifying the rule Nancy weaponized so it cannot be misused again. Nancy's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes, word for word, and the memo specifically names her as an example of what not to do. That is her consequence, and it is public record now. The new board also launches a budget review that reveals vendor favoritism across 3 years and multiple contracts. The landscaping company loses the contract, and the board opens bidding to other vendors. Nancy's brother-in-law threatens to sue, but his lawyer takes one look at the audit and tells him to drop it. Eric sends me a bottle of whiskey with a note that says, "You earned this." I crack it open and pour a glass. My fence is finished, the panels are up, and the contractor did a great job. It looks exactly like I wanted, and every time I see it, I think about Nancy screaming that I did not submit the right form and that the work was illegal. I finish my drink and walk outside. The fence is solid, the gate swings smooth, and the property line is exactly where the survey said it was. A few neighbors stop by over the next week to ask about the recall and the audit. I tell them the truth, and most of them say they wish they had spoken up sooner. One neighbor, the guy who posted the cropped screenshot, apologizes and says he should have asked for the full story before jumping on Nancy's bandwagon. I tell him it is fine, and the important thing is that the board is fixed now. He asks if I am going to run for the board. I laugh and say I have a fence to enjoy, and that is enough leadership for me. A month later, the new board sends out a newsletter with the updated enforcement policy, the vendor transparency rules, and a list of upcoming town halls where residents can ask questions. The tone is completely different from Nancy's reign. It is respectful, clear, and focused on actual community needs instead of power trips. I run into Bill at the gas station one day. He looks embarrassed and says he is sorry for not speaking up sooner. I tell him I get it, Nancy was intimidating, and it takes guts to challenge someone like that. He says he is not running for the board again, and he thinks the new leadership is better for everyone. I agree. Nancy moves out 3 months later. I hear through the group chat that she sold her house and relocated to another state. Nobody throws a going-away party. The new board president sends a polite goodbye message in the newsletter, and that is it. The fence stands, the covenants are clearer, and the HOA is run by people who actually care about the neighborhood instead of using it as a personal fiefdom. I still have the survey report, the vendor favoritism summary, and the recordings of Nancy's threats. I keep them in a folder in my office, just in case anyone else decides to weaponize fake rules. But so far, nobody has. The board is transparent, the enforcement is fair, and the neighborhood feels like a community again, instead of a surveillance state. I am glad you tuned in.